Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Gashi Issa. I am the Black Justice Coordinator at the Hamilton Community Legal Clinic. And welcome to our provincial elections town hall. Thank you for joining. And to everyone watching, I really hope that you can engage and really take this opportunity to listen to candidates. Tonight, we are talking to the Hamilton Center candidates. And so we have some questions prepared, and there's also an opportunity for folks watching to ask questions as well. I'm just going to start with a land acknowledgement. So we are in the city of Hamilton, and it's situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. We further acknowledge that this land is covered by the Between the Lakes Purchase 1792 between the Crown and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Today, the city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and we recognize that we must do more to learn about the rich history of this land so that we can better understand our roles as residents, neighbors, partners, and caretakers. And today, as we talk about elections and the importance of representation in elections, may we also remember that this government is still colonial and it is still on, it is a settler government, and I think that's something that we should keep kind of in our spirit. So I'm very excited to start. I want to give an opportunity for the candidates to introduce themselves. So I'm just gonna ask folks kind of randomly. Maybe we'll start with Sandy. I would like y'all to introduce yourselves, speak to your commitments and platforms on the subject specifically of systemic racism, hate, poverty, and disability. So, Sandy.
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Sandy Crawley. I moved to Hamilton in 2017. I'm loving it very much. I grew up in Ottawa. I'm a bit of a political junkie. And I moved here because my son and his lovely wife and two of my grandsons live in the riding too, and I wanted to be close to them. I'm a professional actor and musician by trade, and I've also run a number of not-for-profit organizations. I've been an art activist all my life. My last paying desk job was running a literacy organization, and I was very proud of the work we did there. And I'm here for the Green Party. I think that I encourage everyone who's watching to go to gpo.ca and take a look at our platform. It's quite comprehensive on the subjects that we're here to discuss today and many other important issues. Climate, of course, transportation, energy, housing. But on systemic racism, our commitment is to fully fund the Anti-Racism Directorate, reversing the cuts that have been made to it by the esteemed Mr. Ford. We are encouraging the Ontario Public Service to eliminate racism, and we want to institute random external audits so that nobody can kind of hide from perhaps behavior that's questionable. We're supporting the London Family Act, of course, and we want to take a serious look at the overrepresentation of Black and Indigenous children in the social system. It's way out of whack how many people of color and Indigenous people are there. Of course, it goes back to the 60s scoop and the terrible schools, that what we settlers did. I encourage you again on the Indigenous file to go to our platform. It's quite comprehensive, and I don't have time to go into it now. On hate, I guess the London Family Act would be the primary legislative measure. I don't think there's any party that is promoting hate. I certainly hope not. I know that we have a particular problem actually here in Hamilton. We have a sizable movement of people who seem to be hating others, the otherism, and I think it's based on fear and probably a sense of entitlement that nobody should have, because we're all here in this together. On poverty, We want to shift from the GDP to the index of well-being that was developed a few years ago. We think it's quite a useful tool. We want to improve research on homelessness, which is also a big issue, specifically in this riding. We bear the brunt of it here in Hamilton Center, and we want to take a serious look at food insecurity, literacy, as I mentioned before. Um, and on disability, we are the first party to call, and the only party, I guess, that's calling for to double the ODSP. And also, we want to get back to a basic income, which, of course, we had that wonderful pilot running here in Hamilton. Um, the Ford government canceled it, and I think that was a big mistake because I think it's clear that the economy would be helped a lot if everyone had $2,000 a month or a little bit more. That money would all come back into our local economy. Inequality obviously is a huge problem, and so yeah, on disability, the ODSP, I think doubling that would be a big help, and we want to update the Accessibility Act, of course, and that's really what I have to say in terms. I don't want to go into the weeds on the whole platform, but I really encourage people to go to gpo.ca and take a look at our plan because it's quite comprehensive.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sandy. I just completely forgot to say that just 3 minutes for each question. So I'm going to repeat it again. So please introduce yourself and speak to your commitments and platform on systemic racism, hate, poverty, and disability. Nigel.
Thank you for having me here today. I'm Nigel Cherian, representing the Communist Party of Canada, Ontario. Race, poverty, and disability are central to my campaign, and my experience of the subject is clearly written on my skin and doesn't really need to be explained. I'm here, however, because I'm part of a long, proud history of fighting for liberation for the most vulnerable and uh, poorly represented people of our society and across the globe. This rich history and the fact that colonized people around the world have taken up the mantle of communist, I believe, comes from our systemic understanding of these issues as interconnected and interlocking issues, issues that transcend tweaks in policy decisions and minor concessions. We understand fundamentally that race and disability are deeply entrenched with ideas of productivity and capital. Fundamentally, without a turn to socialism and away from capitalism, people of color will always be at the bottom of society. There is no fair capitalism, only exploitation. Ask those that process our goods, ask the countries we brutalize regularly. Colonization was a mode of capitalism to spread, and I am too well aware of this. Capitalism is fundamentally racist. All the parties will speak on an anti racism minister or pushing back against racism using education, as if another polished politician will solve our issues. And this is what's so fundamentally frustrating about other parties. All their positional points pretend as if a being that can't be quite grasped or merely gestured at, when to us it's a physical being felt by us every day. We need to demilitarize the police, reallocate funding. We need to stop corporate, private, or public development on lands with indigenous claims. We need to abolish the temporary foreign worker programs, which has led to the abuse of so many POC, and actually provide easy ways for them to migrate. We need a strong labor bill of rights and actual rights to unionize and demand our own rights. We need to recognize the importance of climate change in our struggle against nationalize key industries, put legal limits on emissions, because our extractive, destructive environmental policies create the immigrant crises. No policy, no struggle can be isolated. We, as a people, need power for ourselves. And I believe that's what the Communist Party recognizes so fundamentally. We are all kin. We are all in a struggle together. Other parties will have you struggle to have your voice platformed. They will simply concede to you. But we will fight with you and we will struggle with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Ekaterini?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. Gachi? Gashi?
Gashi.
Gashi, beautiful name.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for having me here. Today, I think that's a very important discussion. Like Sandy mentioned, we are disproportionately affected here in Hamilton by these issues. And so, as we're moving forward, one thing I do want to start with is recognizing that this meeting is a form of reconciliation, a form of healing and moving forward to do better for us and for our communities, our Indigenous people, and our relations. So today, this afternoon, I was at a mosque and I was chatting with my friend. Her name is Afaf. She came from Iran. She came in 2005. She was telling me about her experiences with racism. And what we noticed is that our systems will tell us that discrimination, racism, we're battling these things, we're doing better. But Hamiltonian experiences every single day show us that we're not getting better. It is getting worse. And so my name is Ekaterina Demakis. I am running with the Ontario Liberal Party here in Hamilton Centre because I seek positive change. The Liberal Party, now we have a new team, fresh ideas, fresh minds, and that includes an intersectional approach to everything we do. So we're taking into consideration systemic racism, we're taking into consideration ableism, discrimination, and we're tackling those issues in everything that we aim to do and all the platform, our entire platform, everything that we suggest. What we saw in Buffalo is not just in Canada, it goes far beyond. It is in Hamilton too. It happens in Hamilton too. And that is why we plan on banning handguns and we plan on tackling human rights concerns and hate crimes even harder, investigating them better, because we need to do better. Why hasn't this been done already? We cannot lose any more Hamiltonians. Now, we understand that creating new strategies requires new ideas, and that is why we will bring that standalone minister for anti-racism because it is an important part of it. It is. We can't just say it's not part of it. And we will enhance education for for Indigenous people and for Black Hamiltonians in order to unlock their opportunities in the educational sphere and beyond for them to exit the cycle of poverty, the cycle that they've been locked in. And that is why we will also double OSAP funding. It is very important that we look at every step of the way. And we need to address issues in Hamilton right now, which is why we will increase ODSB rates by 20% in the next 2 years. And on top of that, we will bring back the basic income pilot that Sandy mentioned, that the Ontario Liberal Party first initiated back here in Hamilton. That is what we need. We will reduce cost of living overall by reducing gas prices, fare prices, childcare, food prices. It is a multi-level approach, and it is a fully costed platform that has been thoroughly examined for an intersectional approach that Hamiltonians need. But this cannot happen if we don't work together. We need to work together, and that is why on June 2nd, use your precious right to vote. And vote. I'm here for Hamilton. Go vote on June 2nd. Your vote matters. Thank you, Gashi.
Thank you, Ekaterini. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. I just want to let folks know who are watching that you all have the opportunity to kind of send in some questions, and hopefully the candidates have some opportunity to answer them. So we're now moving on into a question period. We have 5 questions prepared, each on the topics that we kind of skimmed over. And then you also have, as candidates, 2 to 3 minutes each to answer. So I'm going to start with the first question, and Nigel, you'll go first. So what do you and your party believe is necessary in order to combat systemic racism within the institutional systems that are governed by the province? So, for example, the school system, healthcare, and hospitals.
So, it is a multifaceted issue. It requires some fairly basic understandings of what is and how colonization has worked and how these structures oppress us. For example, one of the most important and fundamental rights that are required is the right to language, the right for Indigenous people to teach in their own languages and to, have signs, have all of these things within their own languages and to maintain those things. another aspect of it is you need to recognize that our struggle sort of provincially doesn't exist with just provincially. It exists sort of, for example, there's a lot of discussion about economy and energy and things of those natures. And our pollution, fundamentally, if we do not nationalize these industries and take a concern about how and put those things under democratic control, they pollute the atmosphere and create worsening issues for the global south as we face a climate catastrophe. Provincially, there's also issues with militarized police, with aggressive and extremely racist posturing towards indigenous activists. There are issues around we need to decriminalize drug usage. ODSP, our platform may not say double ODSP, but we suggest a livable ODSP, a guaranteed livable income. And so these measures are more and fundamentally tied to costs of living, and recognize them as being fundamental to your humanity, not just as a part of a separate program that exists. And that's sort of what our entire platform is about the connection between those intersecting troubles and struggles that are fundamental to workers, to POC, to disabled people, etc.
Thank you, Nigel. Sandy, I'm going to move on to you. I'm just going to repeat the question very quickly. What do you and or your party believe is necessary in order to combat systemic racism within institutional systems that are governed by the province, school system, healthcare, or hospitals?
Well, the fundamental thing, I must admit, I agree with a lot of what Nigel just said, but I think that poverty is really at the base of that racialized people are suffering more. Obviously, it's quite clear from the inequality that exists, and specifically in healthcare, for instance. I think that the what happened with COVID in the long term homes is a result of the privatization of those homes, and no recognition that those people, the people who work there, the health workers and support workers, are severely underpaid, and we've got to address that. And one of the ways we need to address that, as our party says, is do away with private long-term care, and we actually have a plan to give much more care in the home, which I think is much preferable. It's also prudent. One of the things that I admire about the party that I've decided to support and be part of is the fact that we are actually not ideologically bound by any system. We're open to creative, progressive solutions, and we don't care where they come from. We have been playing the role that the NDP traditionally used to play, which was to develop the party, the policies that do help people, as opposed to companies and overlords, if you would, and not begrudge and help to sell those policies to make people aware of why we need progressive policies. And then the other parties come along and take them. The NDP used to play that role quite convincingly. I'm old enough to have sat beside Tommy Douglas in a Chevrolet convertible the day the NDP was invented in Ottawa, and singing labor songs with my 5-string banjo. But unfortunately, I think that as the NDP tasted power and got closer to power, having formed a government once here in Ontario, having come close in the federal system, they've compromised some of those principles and moved away from some of the bold and courageous policies that we need. In terms of racism, it's a scourge on us, and it's about inequality. It's really about people not recognizing that we're all in the same boat, as Bob Ray used to like to say. And we really believe that our policies are based on what's good for the community, not good for the companies, not good for the power brokers. And we're not, as Nigel said before we actually went public here, we're not in any illusion, and we're not under any illusion. I don't think I'm going to unseat Andrea Horvath, the leader of the NDP. This riding has gone NDP for decades, but I think we need to send a signal to all of the old line parties, if you'll pardon that expression, all three of them, that Ontario, there's a growing number of Ontarians who are recognizing that we need systemic change. Racism is one of the key issues that we need to address constantly, and it is a problem right here in Hamilton. We see too many examples. As Ekaterini, did I say that right? Said before. So, I mean, we want to work across party lines. Mike Schreiner has been very clear about that, and he's been successful at doing that. And we think that we need to continue to do that. Irrespective of parties, we need to get to some basic values, human values.
Thank you, Sandy. Ekaterini?
Could you repeat the question again?
Of course,
Please.
of course. So what do you or your party believe is necessary in order to combat systemic racism within the institutional systems that are governed by the province? So examples that we have are school systems and healthcare.
Yes, so that is an excellent question because it touches on multiple levels. Like I said, this issue is multifaceted and there's no one key answer to it. If there was, we would have, done this a long time ago. It would have been a oversimplified issue, but it's not like that. It isn't. And we would fool ourselves if we really thought that systemic racism only has one layer to it. And so we are taking a lot of different approaches to it to combat the different aspects of systemic racism within our different institutions, like you said, in the provincial government. And so looking at them one by one, I think we believe the anti-racism standalone minister is going to be key because in doing so, they're going to be able to oversee every process along our governmental system that ensures that we are battling racism at every step of the way, and that includes education. For example, we will be reforming our educational system so that it includes the history and especially the history of residential schools, 60 Scoop, like Sandy mentioned, of Indigenous people and other cultures like our Asian community here in Hamilton, our Black Canadians, and others. So that way it becomes more inclusive and more informative of our past, present, and hopefully that way history doesn't repeat itself. And so that is one approach we're taking. The other approach, very key part, is that we will be implementing the 92 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation report for the Indigenous people that was done as part of reconciling us all together and taking a step towards healing. And that report touches on a lot of different aspects of our provincial government. So it touches on policing, the way policing is done, who polices Indigenous communities, and our Hamilton. Who decides what criminal behavior constitutes here in Hamilton among Indigenous people and whatnot? How we're going to consider the dark past that we've caused with residential schools and beyond, and how it affects intergenerational trauma as we see it today among our Indigenous community in Hamilton Center. And that applies beyond the Indigenous community. So applying and implementing the Truth and Reconciliation report is very key in understanding and taking an active step towards healing and reconciling with our different communities here in Hamilton. Now, a couple other things that we're doing is we're going to be pushing our youth, especially our youth and our entrepreneurs, to pursuing education, pursuing their dreams through different funds and grants. So a lot of times we see disproportionately marginalized communities, including people with disabilities, people who are victims to racism and discrimination, are falling victim to impoverishment. And that impoverishment stops them from pursuing their dreams of changing their communities, our communities, Hamilton Center, of improving our communities, of working on our communities and working with other Hamiltonians. And that is why we'll be working with people of Hamilton to help them develop their dreams, to help them implement their dreams, make them a reality through different funds and grants for Indigenous people, Black Hamiltonians, and other people as well, other different groups that are suffering and are falling victim to racism. So these are just the start. and it's going to be a long path. But with your vote, we can make it happen and take it step by step to do better. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ekaterini. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question. Thank you so much for your answers. So, recently, Hamilton has been dubbed the hate crime capital of Canada, and we have seen reported hate crimes rise by 38% within 2021. This also does not include hate crimes that were not reported to the police. What are you and your party planning to do about this problem? I'm going to start with Sandy.
Well, first of all, we are also supporting uh, the removal of handguns, but the specific hate here in Hamilton is very troubling. I must admit, last May, I guess it was, around the consciousness raising event of the unfortunate murder of George Floyd south of the border, I was very happy to see. I mean, I think 400 or 500 people marched from Dundurn there down to City Hall, and we had a really good rally. And it was encouraging to see that actually there were more white people there in support than people of color, and we need to keep growing that movement. I actually have more faith in citizens movements than I do in political parties. I think that the Green Party is the best choice right now because we have that idealism, we have some really strong values, and we're willing to take risks because we're not deluding ourselves that we're about to take power. But hate in Hamilton. What we need to do actually is, and everyone here has talked about it, is we need to take a careful look at our own police here, and we've got to look at their attitudes. We've got to bring an anti-racism screen and make sure that we educate our police. I don't want to defame anyone in particular, but I've seen racism, overt racism, at least verbally, from the police themselves. And obviously, when those hate groups take action, which they do, I mean, what happened here at the last Pride Parade was just disgusting. Those people need to be prosecuted. We need to actually use the power of the law to work against that hate and that which comes out of fear, which comes out of that sense of entitlement, which comes out of that fear of the other. But it's really sad, and unfortunately, it does seem to be growing up. The idea of white supremacism, what happened in Buffalo last week. I mean, it's quite frightening, and it's not far away, to Buffalo, and it is happening here in Hamilton. And I think it's going to take a concerted effort with all levels of government and discussing this. Don't bury it. Don't push it under the carpet. Don't pretend it's not happening. So the Green Party is there to get the best ideas from everyone. Again, not ideologically bent, just what are we going to do to look after each other as human beings? And there's no, as Ekaterini said, there's no magic bullet there. Pardon the metaphor, but we've just got to work together. We really have to work together, and we have to join hands and say, no, we will not accept hate. We've got to teach people from our kids on. There's a wonderful old song that says it had to be taught. I don't know if you know that old song, but it is something that's learned, and it can be unlearned, and that's what we have to work on, I think.
Thank you, Sandy. Ekaterini, I'm going to throw the question to you. So again, recently Hamilton has been dubbed the hate crime capital of Canada, and we have seen reported hate crimes rise by 38%. This does not include hate crimes that were not reported to the police. What are you and your party planning to do about this problem?
Yes, I think that's an excellent question. And to start, I'm gonna rephrase what Sandy just said. There's no, magic way we can solve this, absolutely. But there's a lot of things we can do to address it that we haven't done for years now, for decades, especially in Hamilton Center, it hasn't been done. So to start, I will mirror a little bit Sandy there. It does start from the surface. It does start from children. So we will strengthen our approach to addressing hate crime discrimination within the schools, within our provincial institution like healthcare, police systems, in order to make sure that we are tackling the issue from the roots and it doesn't reproduce itself, and recreate itself in larger forms of hate crime. And when it does, it is an issue. We see it again and again in Hamilton Center. It keeps happening. It's not the first time. It was not the first time that we saw it a few days ago, and it is out of control. We need to do something about it immediately. And that is why, like I said, we will be banning handguns, because that is an action that we can take that's very simple right here, right now. And we're implementing change that can bring immediate safety, at least as much as possible. We will also, like I said, better investigate hate crimes in order to understand what comes to the root of a hate crime. What led a person to use their resources, to use their environment in order to commit that crime against another person? How could we prevent that in the future? By investigating a bit better and finding ways through our standalone anti racism minister to tackle it further and further as we progress. Because these tactics may work today, but they may not work tomorrow in Hamilton Center. They may not work the day after. So it's going to be a continuous process of working together with Hamiltonians to better form our plan over time. But this is how it starts. It starts by uniting our communities. And I will bring it back to the 92 calls for action by the Truth and Reconciliation report that will allow for reconciliation with Canadians, with Hamiltonians that still think that it is us versus them. Like Sandy said earlier, that othering, we need to address that through implementing the calls for action for the report, as well as better educating our children and implementing better changes and progress to our educational system that tackles the issue at its roots.
Thank you, Ekaterini. Nigel.
So I'm a brown person, and the experience of extreme hate rising is something that I've experienced this week. Never mind, a couple months. It's a constant experience in Hamilton, and no matter where you go. And my proclivity is never to go to the cops. For me, there is no point where investigation can happen, and because I'm more afraid of the cops than of hate crimes. I would rather deal with it community wise, or at least go home, rather than deal with it and deal with the bureaucracy that exists around it. This is and that's the vast majority of experience for most people. It's so common that you can't go around and actively tell like every single experience you've had. It will be overwhelming. People would shun you as being, overly sensitive, whatever it may be. It is just a part of the experience. And one of the aspects of this is that fundamentally these are not just the othering of a process. This is fundamentally a part of a larger economic process. Fascism and a lot of these like right-wing hyper white supremacist elements are born out of the need to enslave people, to privatize businesses. When you look at all the sort of hyper right-wing governments that exist, what are their proclivities? Their proclivities are to extract as much wealth as possible, to indenture their people, to serve those kind of fascistic elements, and suck up wealth into the minority and the elite. And so fundamentally, I don't believe it is about this mythical othering, partially because it seems defeatist to me. How do you address something that is sort of innate to your otheringness? How do you think yourself out of racism? Racism to me is a fundamentally created apparatus, a system that was born out of the need to gain free labor from people. And to address those things, you need to address those things as those systems that came into being. You need to deal with temporary workers' rights. You need to deal with, instead of funding cops, you need to fund, like, I'm more likely to go to a community center. I have a hate crime done against me. I want to go to my peers. Fund those community centers. Fund those people and give them the ability to give me consolement, because you can't undo the hate crime. It's happened. By the time I've told you, it's done. You need to give me the place where I feel safe. Give me the apparatus to know that cops are not going to be dissing me when I leave the office, when I report my crime. These kinds of things, and the community support is what is fundamental here. And you need to address all those concerns about, and you need to give me a life where those things I can walk around them, that I know that I'm safe, and that like I'm supported by a community, rather than having to deal with them through the cops in any way. Thank you.
Thank you, Nigel. Okay, so we're moving on to the next question. So, disabled people have been left behind in this pandemic, especially with regard to government supports such as access to accessible, affordable housing and social assistance rates. In what ways is your party planning to support and uplift disabled people? Ekaterina?
Thank you again for this perfect question. So, to start, we will be appointing a standalone minister for disabilities to address disabilities and make sure that our communities, Hamilton Center, is even more accessible for Hamiltonians with disabilities. We see it time after time. We have rules, but they're not properly enforced, which we will also make sure that we tackle the better enforcement of these policies, these regulations to ensure that all Hamiltonians can access their community to the best of their abilities without their disability being having stopping them, or without the access to accessible resources stopping them. And so that's how we're going to be starting it. And obviously, we're going to be, like I mentioned, we're going to be bringing back the basic income pilot and on top of increasing ODSB by 20% over the next 2 years in order to help them give that assistance that Hamiltonians every day at the door tell me they need. They need that extra hand, they need that extra lift. And it goes well beyond just increasing ODSB, it goes beyond making making resources accessible to them. That is why we will also be addressing housing and creating housing, affordable housing, social housing, and community housing that has access to the resources they need appropriately and in a timely manner. Because we see, like you said, time after time, especially during COVID, people with disabilities have been left behind. The Ford government, these past 4 years, I talked to people at the doors. They've left, they feel like they were overlooked, like they were not part of the plan, and we cannot have that in Hamilton Center anymore. Our people, our Hamiltonians with disabilities, are our Hamiltonians. They're part of our community and they offer so much to our diversity, so much to our rich community. And we need to embrace that. We need to work with them, not against them, through ableist standards that stop them from embracing themselves to the best of their abilities. And so we will also be making mental health professionals more available throughout the system, especially in schools as well, for kids with disabilities, so that kids who are disproportionately left behind by the Ford government the past 4 years are not anymore. We need to address that because those systemic barriers start from the bottom. They start from childhood. And if we don't address it from the bottom level, what are we doing? We're just doing patchwork, band-aid solutions. It's not enough. Hamiltonians with disabilities need more. They are entitled to more. We will also be enforcing rules that make sure that every step of the way, disabilities are taken into account. Everything that the government does through our standalone minister is accessible to people with disabilities, to our Hamiltonians with disabilities, and we will bring that here to Hamilton because we need our voices to be heard. We need our voices to be in the table so that we can say our Hamiltonians do not have access to these resources. Our Hamiltonians are left behind. Our Hamiltonians do not have housing. Our Hamiltonians with disability are limited. We need to do better. And so we will reform our social assistance programs and our special education to make sure that every step of the way, at every level, both at the base but also moving forward, we're doing better for Hamiltonians with disabilities. We're making our community more accessible for them.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Rini. Thank you. So, Nigel, just going to repeat the question. Disabled people have been left behind in this pandemic, especially with regard to government supports such as access to accessible, affordable housing, and social assistance rates. In what ways is your party planning to support and uplift disabled people?
So beyond the specifics, ODSP, living wage, you need those kinds of very basic things that allow people to live sort of every day. But I think there's also a conversation to be had and a reckoning that the Canadian society has to have with the MAID bill and how that's affected the disabled community and how that's, fundamentally created a situation where we euthanize our disabled comrades. It is not a good lesson when we have diverted our funding from creating positions that help disabled people get free housing, finding housing that is free of sense and accommodated to. It's not just that housing has to be affordable, and one of the it has to be clean and has to be appropriate to their specific condition, and these things have to be considered in tandem. And I think one of the things is when we talk about affordable housing, often the other parties don't talk about what affordable means. For the Communist Party, that means 20%, 20% of your income. That is at most what affordable housing means. And if other parties are to do due diligence in the work, they would define what affordable means. What does it mean to have it affordable? And further, you need work and publicly subsidized housing. It can't just be market affordable housing. It has to be publicly subsidized because they actually take into consideration a lot of the concerns that people have. They can work proactively with people, with social workers, to address a lot of the concerns that disabled people have. Fundamentally, we also need to recognize we're not out of the pandemic. We're not. Fundamentally, we are still seeing caseloads every day, and this is extremely problematic for immunocompromised people. They will feel fundamentally left out until the pandemic is over. And we need to achieve zero COVID fundamentally. Otherwise, they will feel left behind, and that's their right. Of course, we have, because we haven't considered immunocompromised in our attempt to reopen the economy. We need to engage with the pandemic as it kills our people, as it kills our elderly, and address those concerns face on and deal with them as they come, instead of opening up whenever we deem it necessary to the local grocery chain, And so a lot of these things, what helps what strikes me is that disability is created in the context of a lack of accessibility. It is only when things are not accessible does disability come into center stage. If we have created housing that is unachievable for ODSP, then we haven't that's a concern not just for disabled people but for everyone. So we need to make sure that in our universalization of programs, that is how we fundamentally deal with and proactively help our most vulnerable in our society.
Thank you, Nigel. So Sandy, I'm going to repeat the question one more time. Disabled people have been left behind in this pandemic, especially with regard to government supports, such as access to accessible, affordable housing and social assistance rates. In what ways is your party planning to support and uplift disabled people?
Well, it's interesting. I've been answering a lot of, at like 4 and 5 in the morning. I've been answering a lot of emails that I get from specifically from constituents, and I've had quite a number from people who actually are worried about the clawbacks that have happened through the pandemic. The rates were changed, and I haven't got the numbers right in front of me, but I couldn't believe that the Ford government was doing this, or that certain bureaucrats were doing this. As far as housing goes, I really urge people to take a look at our master plan for affordable housing, because it takes into the idea of intensifying urbanization as opposed to. I'm very proud actually of the city here having been the first city to actually engage with Stop the Sprawl movement. It's the strongest here in the Hamilton area, and I think we can go even further than our platform does in terms of regulating how housing is built. Obviously, accessibility should always be an issue. I think we can actually we should be saying to anybody who wants to develop a multi-unit housing, and we should encourage that. Again, take a look at our plan. We think we should be able to build in laneways. We should be able to build more fourplexes, not big mansions. I mean, Doug Ford and his developer friends want to keep building these monster houses that no one can afford. It's a complete waste of time and energy. We should actually, I would go so far as to say you shouldn't be able to get a building permit for new affordable housing unless you're going to make sure that it's got solar panels or heat pumps or something so that we can address the climate as Ekaterini said, it's intersectional. All of these issues actually relate to each other. But in terms of accessibility, as I said in my opening statement, we are going to see we will promote a total revamping of the Access for Ontarians with Disability Act, because it was brought in. I guess there was some nice lip service paid, and the accessibility movement did start during the 15 years of the Liberal Party running the province, but it didn't go far enough, and it wasn't fully enforced as the Liberal candidate here actually admitted. And the idea of these standalone ministries, it's all very well, I guess, as long as that minister gets their elbows on the table around the cabinet. When I was running a literacy organization, I got to deal with our Indigenous Affairs minister, who didn't seem to have any power, and nobody listened to what he was trying to accomplish. And he just kept pawning stuff off to the feds. So I'm not sure that standalone ministries are the answer, and growing the bureaucracy is the answer. In terms of housing, again, I think that we have the best plan. And in terms of healthcare, again, for disability, I'm really glad to see that at least two of the other mainline parties have embraced Mike Schreiner's idea of making sure that all mental health is you can get treatment under with your OHIP card, as opposed to there are a couple of things that were treatable, but we think that all mental health is health, as we said, and we were really glad to see the NDP and the Liberals pick up that line. So I think that the Accessibility Act I think is going to be a key to things, and then enforcing those stricter standards.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm going to move on to our last question, and then hopefully we can make some time for questions from the audience. I will start with Nigel. So, in the wake of the London attack, the National Council of Canadian Muslims brought forward legislation earlier this year to help address Islamophobia in Ontario. The bill did not pass before the election campaign began. Do you support the legislation, and what would you and your party do to address Islamophobia and broadly hate in Ontario?
Yes, we support the legislation. We are very excited to see a lot of the work that brown people have done, and Muslim people have done specifically around organizing for their own communities, and we support that sort of work. I think the way we deal with Islamophobia is partially, it's a multifaceted affair. You need to strengthen their communities. You need to fund their organizational groups. You need to bring awareness about their communities, and like show people what their faith is about, because fundamentally they are people of our community, and they belong here, and they belong cooperating with us. I believe that a lot of Islamophobia that we have faced is partially due to our gross international or foreign policies, and a lot of fear mongering that happens due to the wars we take abroad. And I think that fundamentally there is a separation fundamentally between how we discuss Islamophobia sort of on the ground level and dealing with it, and how on the foreign level, on foreign politics, we end a lot about how these countries are evil fundamentally. And fundamentally that shows that it shows people that these people are to be feared. And so when we engage in war, when we engage in a lot of these international foreign policy decisions, we propagate that fear. And it is important to retrieve ourselves from a lot of that sort of foreign policy things on the national level, and on the regional level, create places for Muslim people to be teachers, to be guidance personnel, to have places where they are shown as part of our community and are felt welcomed as part of our communities. And fundamentally, the best way is to listen to them and do as they ask and fund their programs and do their programs. And the party is a firm believer in that.
Thank you so much, Nigel. Sandy, I'll go to you. I'm just going to repeat the question. In the wake of the London attack, the National Council of Canadian Muslims brought forward legislation earlier this year to help address Islamophobia in Ontario. The bill did not pass before the election campaign began. Do you support the legislation, and what would you and your party do to address Islamophobia and hate broadly in Ontario?
Well, yes. Again, I mentioned it in my opening statement, the London Families Act. It was very disappointing that the parties didn't come together to support that. And I hope that the next government will pass that act. It's a good step in the right direction. I'm just going to delve into my own background. As I said earlier, I'm an arts activist. I'm a professional artist, a performer, and musician. And I really think the arts are going to be key to this. I'm just remembering with my friend Mohammed Hook, who helped me here in Hamilton before I moved here. But one of the last things I did in 2016, in my last paying job with the National Reading Campaign, was present an event at the Hamilton Art Gallery called Black Words Matter, playing on the Black Lives Matter. And we had a wonderful cross section of people of color, and including a couple of Muslim artists at that event, and it was very well attended, and it was very satisfying to. And I think that we all have creativity, and I think that the arts, as my friend Tom Wilson says, art is the new steel. Hamilton and Hamilton Center is home to a lot of artists. The arts are growing here. The arts were a key to re-energizing and bringing back a strong community life to Pittsburgh, another steel town. And I think that it's going to happen here as well. And I think that's going to help with Islamophobia, with all kinds of phobias and racism that people have. And so I think that there's a key. Personally, I'm looking forward to working in Hamilton with the creative community to make that the economy of the arts stronger and the community art stronger. And I think that art for me actually is the most powerful language that we have. It communicates, our artists and our architects and our poets and our musicians will be remembered long after any politicians' names are long forgotten. And I think it's through art, through theater, through music, through poetry, through books. We have a wonderful writers community. I was thinking about it when we were talking about disability, because there's a great publisher here called Woolshock and Wynne who published a book by a disabled writer here who actually gave the history. But as far as Islamophobia goes and the London Family Act, it's a great first step. It was a terrible thing that happened. We know that something very similar to that happened here with a young man who was trying to stop a brutal thing and was severely, actually lost his life. And again, the way the police handled it was quite shameful. So we have to learn. We have to learn, and the London Family Act is a good step in the right direction. It's just a beginning.
Thank you, Sandy. Ekaterini, in the wake of the London attack, the National Council of Canadian Muslims brought forward legislation earlier this year to help address Islamophobia in Ontario. The bill did not pass before the election campaign began. Do you support the legislation, and what would you and your party do to address Islamophobia and hate in Hamilton?
I'm glad you asked that question because that is a very critical step in order to combating all isms racism, Islamophobia, and different other isms and discriminations, forms of discrimination and phobias that we leave unaddressed. We can say that we're doing better in our communities by being more inclusive, being more diverse, but if we don't implement the changes we need in order to enforce that safety that we need for our fellow Hamiltonians, nothing is going to change. Nothing is going to change. So like I said earlier, I went to the mosque this afternoon and I was talking to my friends, everybody there, different people. I met so many people and they were all telling me about that fear factor. That fear factor that since seeing that incident, they don't want to take their kids to the park. They don't want to take their kids to eat downtown. That's ridiculous. This is a community that once was so bright, so diverse, so inclusive. People all over the world gathered in Hamilton Center to embrace that diversity, and now they feel threatened. And we need to do something about it. So, yes, we do support and we will support and implement with the Ontario Liberal Party the Our London Family Act because it is very much needed. And it is only a step, not the solution to Islamophobia and tackling Islamophobia, but just a step in order to go the right direction, to make sure that we're legislating and making it clear through our laws, through our policies, that we will not tolerate. Enough is enough. Our Hamiltonians have had enough. When I talk to people at the doors, I don't want them to be afraid that I'm going to say something against them because of their beliefs. That's ridiculous. This is an inclusive society. This is an inclusive community. Hamilton was better, and we can do better. We just need to work on it. We need to work together to make sure that those safeties, those regulations are in place so that we can combat hate crimes, we can combat racism, we can combat Islamophobia. And like I said, we must take an intersectional approach to this. So ignoring other aspects that relate back to Islamophobia, perhaps somebody's gender, somebody's skin color, it is important that we take an intersectional approach even to this act, and we implement that intersectional approach in order to make sure our community is safe. Hamilton is safe again. Hamilton embraces that diversity so that people can bring in their families, show them the downtown mosque with pride, not with fear. That's what we need. And we need better legislation, and we need to do it right now because Hamiltonians cannot wait anymore. Enough was enough, and we need to do something to better implement safety, to make sure that this is a safe and inclusive environment. Having diversity is one thing, but being inclusive is that step forward to ensure that this diversity is welcomed and we can grow it because that's what made Hamilton rich and that's what will make us rich again. Thank you for that question again.
Thank you, Ekaterini, and thank you for answering to everyone our prepared questions. I see that we have a couple of questions from community, so I'm just going to ask one and ask y'all if you could quickly, within a minute, answer these questions. So I'll just start with the one. I think we'll just do one question. What have you and your party done to lessen barriers that people of color face that have had actual results? I would like concrete examples and not theory. So I will start with Ekaterini. 1 minute, please.
Yes, thank you. I really like that question because absolutely we have to look at track record in order to understand how we're moving forward. And the one thing I want to bring incredible attention to is our basic income pilot. Our basic, as we've seen, bringing basic income, Sandy mentioned it, only helps back our community. It takes that barrier of education, affording living in Hamilton, especially Hamilton Center, affording to create your own businesses, affording to thrive, to embrace the diversity, like I said. And that basic income unlocks it for marginalized communities. We saw that. We saw that, and the Ford government decided to put an end to it, and that was unacceptable. It was unacceptable because it was a key aspect to growing our community, our Hamilton Center community. As we've seen, marginalized communities are disproportionately impoverished, and we need to address that not by patchwork solutions, but in depth work And that was the basic income pilot that we want to bring back, and we are committed to bringing back for positive change in Hamilton Center.
Thank you, Ekaterini. Nigel, the question is to you. What have you and your party done to lessen barriers that people of color face that have had actual results? I would like concrete examples and not just theory.
So the Communist Party has a long and very proud history of organizing with racialized communities from the beginning, from the 1930s. In the 1930s, part of the reason I joined the party was we advocated for Britain to leave India and decolonize, and we advocated that as a part of our fundamental campaign for workers' rights. And we have since then, since the beginning, been at marches for BLM. We have been at marches for everything. We have advocated for all of these things from the first day. A lot of our communities and a lot of our clubs are based with Pakistani leadership, with lots of different POC who work incredibly hard every day fighting with the people on the ground. And that's what we do best. We organize masses on the ground. We fight for specific policies on the ground. And even though we're not electorally present, we are present every day with the people, fighting with them right there on the streets.
Thank you, Nigel. And Sandy, the question is to you. What have you and your party done to lessen barriers that people of color face that have had actual results? And the asker of the question is asking for concrete examples and not just theory.
I'm going to go back to my own personal experience. Before I was a Green Party activist or candidate, presenting that Black Words Matter event. I was very proud of that, and I think it had a concrete result in the fact that people became aware of local Hamilton artists of color articulating their life experience, their lived experience, so that people could understand and raise their consciousness. The concrete thing that our party has done with our one lone but very valiant member, who's our leader, is passed the first act that got unanimous support from all the other parties. And I think what the other thing that's having a concrete effect is we're upping the ante on a lot of these issues. On the ODSP, we're really glad to see the Liberals and the NDP come close to our idea of doubling it. They don't want to do it quite so quickly. On the basic income, which was a wonderful pilot, it doesn't need to be a pilot anymore. There's enough evidence. We need to do it. And doubling the OSP, literally doubling it right now, is the first step towards, as it's very clear in our platform, is the first step towards a universal basic income. And those are concrete things. Another concrete thing that I personally did when I first moved to Hamilton was joined the board of the Hamilton Youth Poets. I don't know if anybody knows the Hamilton Youth Poets, but they're great. Many of them are young people of color, and it's a great organization here in town. Again, a creative organization that I think has raised the consciousness and the spirits of those people who felt, those young people who felt oppressed by racism, by sexism, by LGBTQ oppression, and so on. They stand up and they voice themselves. They express their lived experience, and it changes their lives and the way they feel about themselves, as well as everyone who's witnessing it. So again, I'm going back to creativity again. That, to me, is a concrete result. When you express yourself and you feel better about yourself, then you're stronger and your community can learn more about your different experience and not be afraid of that different perspective and that different lived experience. So, working across party lines, upping the ante, pushing the old line parties to become more progressive, that's what we do concretely.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Thank you, Nigel. Thank you, Ekaterini, for joining us, for taking time out of your day to answer our questions. Yeah, this was a pleasure. And to folks who are watching, We also have another town hall tomorrow from 6 to 7, and it's with the candidates from the Hamilton, West, Ancaster, Dundas riding. So
Ah,
again,
Siam Chandra, my friend. He'll be there.
yeah, awesome.
Very good.
Thank you guys so much. It was great
Thank
meeting
Thank
you.
you.
you. Thank you. This was really, I'm sorry the other parties weren't here, but so be it.
That's okay.
Thank you so
And
much. I hope
I'd
you have a
like to,
beautiful day. And thank you for organizing this.